I'm Gretchen Peters. This afternoon's program is Ins and Outs of the Nebraska Hall of Fame, presented by Sara Crook. Dr. Sara Crook's love of Nebraska history and politics goes back to her childhood. As a farm girl growing up in a country church and attending a one-room country school, do we all do that?
So, yeah, how old am I, right?
In the Black River Valley in the 1950s and 60s, she developed a deep appreciation for Nebraska and its people that continues to this day. Currently, Dr. Crook is Professor Emeritus of Political Science and History at Peru State College. She has also served as Chair of the Humanities Nebraska Board, President of Nebraska State Historical Society Board, Chair of the Nebraska
Thank
you, Commission, and is the current Chair of Nebraska Hall of Fame Commission. She also is a member of the Humanities Nebraska Speakers Bureau. Please welcome Sara.
Thanks, Gretchen and I were on the Humanities Nebraska Board together.
Right.
Or
15 years ago?
Yeah, something like that.
20 years ago, something, yeah. It was great.
So, anyhow. So today I'm going to talk about the ins and outs of the Nebraska Hall of Fame, and in the end, so put your thinking caps on, I'm going to ask you, who would you like to see in the Nebraska Hall of Fame? Because we are starting a new cycle of that process, so here we go. The Nebraska Hall of Fame was established in 1961. I imagine they were thinking about Nebraska's almost 100 years old, because the centennial was in 1967, and they began to realize we need to document some of this history, so let's start putting some of our famous Nebraskans and create a Nebraska Hall of Fame. If you're inducted into the Nebraska Hall of Fame, you get a bust. I'll talk more about that later, and you're put in one of those hallways. So the first 6 are in that major hallway coming in from the front door, and they have niches in the various hallways where these can go. We have now filled all those niches, so we're having a little bit of debate about when we do pick the next one, where we're going to put it. So think about that as well. So there's 3 ways you can qualify, and these are not and. You don't have to be all 3 things. You only have to be one of the 3 things. You either have to have been born in Nebraska, that alone qualifies you, or you could have gained prominence while you lived in Nebraska, for what you're known for, or that you were like raised in Nebraska, and as a result of having been living in Nebraska, that contributed to your greatness later in life. So you can see baby, kind of childhood, or as an adult, you gained prominence while living in Nebraska. So that, and again, those are all ors, not ands, and some people think it should be and, but they're ors, if that makes sense. Okay. The other criteria, the HOF, Hall of Fame, is that we only select one every 5 years. Now, you may say, well, how do we have so many in the Hall of Fame? Initially, they did like one every other year, back in the 60s and 70s. And then, starting, I believe it was like in the early 90s, they decided, okay, we've kind of caught up. Because again, they didn't have the Hall of Fame until 1961. And so now they have switched it to one every 5 years. One particular round here, about 10 years ago, we had a husband-wife team nominated. And, you know, I mean, we could have picked one or the other, but you can't put them both in. By legislative statute, it's one. not a couple, but one person. The other thing they did, because probably 20 so years, well, close, probably late 80s, the person who was selected, they felt like, many felt like at the time, and I won't identify who it was, that it was his cronies that got him in that were all still in the area because they were all still alive because the person had just recently died. And so the idea was, no, let's make sure that, you know, their legacy lives on and it's not just a bunch of cronies that picked that person for the individual. So minimum of 35 years to have been deceased. We did get an application, again, I won't tell you who, of somebody that's fairly famous, and you know, immediately we said, well, they're not qualified, they haven't been gone 35 years. And the response was, well, this person's so important, we should ignore that requirement. We're like, sorry, the rules are, legislative statute tells us that they have to have been gone 35 years. So there you go. And then the other thing that sometimes disappoints people, because we usually have multiple nominations, is that we're always supposed to give emphasis to social and cultural contributions over sports and entertainment. So, sometimes somebody might be more famous, but not necessarily in the room. There's been a baseball player that has been nominated time and time again, and not that they aren't worthy of being in there, but again, there's baseball Hall of Fames and things like that. So, there you go. Any questions so far? Again, I'm happy to interact. I'm not just
who set up the guidelines, the legislature?
The legislature. The UNICAM will pass those. So originally in 61, and then they updated them in 91.
So is there a committee?
A
committee that?
A commission?
Or a committee that looks at the nominees?
Yes, I'll
and
get
you're
to that.
appointed by the legislature?
No, but I'll get to that.
Okay.
You're a step ahead of me. Those are great questions, so good. I'll make sure, I know they're on here, so we'll talk about it. First inductee, George Norris. Who could tell me about George Norris? Why do you think he was and he was like unanimous?
Mr. Electricity.
Well, yes, REA, the Rural Electrification Administration, was huge, and he was key in bringing that about and bringing electricity to rural Nebraska and rural United States. Do you know what it was? It was a Democrat program that kind of started this idea, though, of an REA. And he was a big supporter of it, much to the chagrin of some of the Republicans, because it was a Democrat program. I know what that was. Think Depression. Think FDR. TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. Where FDR said, these people are poor, they have no electricity, we've got this river that runs amok, let's dam it up, generate some cheap electricity, and help. And George Norris, well, I'll move on here, because you'll see here in a second. He was a huge supporter of the TVA. And again, much to the chagrin, because George Norris was a Republican from Nebraska, from the McCook area. He'd been in the House for 10 years as obviously a House member. And while there, which again, this is what I like about, this is probably my favorite part of George Norris, and it helps support this bottom one of being a nonpartisan unicameral that we have, is that he kept saying, I don't care if it's a Democrat idea or a Republican idea, I just care if it's a good idea. And so he, while a House member, fought against what they called at the time Czar Cannon, who was a fellow Republican, but as the Speaker of the House just wielded unyieldly crazy power, hence the nickname Czar Cannon. And it was Norris, as a relatively young member of the House, who helped write some rules and procedures to rein in the power of the House, the Speaker of the House. Again, a fellow Republican, because no one person should have that much power. Then he got elected as a senator 5 times. He got elected as a U.S. senator. And while there, he was the lead sponsor. All those members of Congress said, oh, I sponsored this, well, yeah, they're one of, 25 names. No, he was the lead sponsor for the 20th Amendment, which was, again, the lame duck amendment. That was the amendment that took, the election stays the first Tuesday after, first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. There you go. And it used to be inauguration wasn't until March 4th. And if you remember, that was a disastrous time period from Hoover to FDR. All the banks started closing, et cetera, because of the Depression. And so he believed, in today's day and age, that we could make that transition from the election to inauguration a much shorter time span. So that you don't have a lame duck president that basically isn't getting anything done. So he was the lead sponsor for and again, some Republicans weren't happy about this because, that was going from Hoover, a Republican, to FDR, a Democrat. But his argument was this is for the betterment of the country, and someday it might be from a Democrat to a Republican. So, you know, one of my favorite phrases I used to always say to my students, and I give my mother credit, and I'm sure your mother would say the same thing, and I keep wanting to say this to Congress today, what goes around comes around. So, you know, let's think about what's good, you know, in theory, not just what's good for my particular party or me in particular. So that's one of my favorite things about George Norris, and I love about him. Again, he was a huge supporter of the TVA, which was an FDR project, which of course didn't sit well with the Republican Party, because of course that's a Democratic administration. That then turned into the rural electrification, this idea of let's find ways to generate cheap electricity. And that's why today only Nebraska has public power. We're the only state. In all the other 49 states and DC, it's private companies that compete to run your public, to give you electricity. So we're unique in that way, and it really stems from Norris's early days. And then, of course, probably what he's often most noted for is the fact that we're the only state with the unicameral. He argued, and again, having been a House member and a Senate member, he argued that, and you see this even today, the House passes a bill, a Senate passes a bill, but they don't match. You know, they're kind of alike, but they don't really match. Well, then what happens is they pick members off of each chamber, typically members who have been on the subcommittee that came up with the bill originally. They send it to a conference committee made up of those people. And what comes out of there sometimes isn't close to either bill, and then they bring it back, and both chambers again have to pass it. If that conference bill comes back and one chamber passes it, but one doesn't, it's done. And sometimes the making of the sausage looks nothing like what you started with. And he argued that he called it the hidden chamber of Congress, that conference committee. He also said that, and again, because he saw this firsthand, that a member of the House or the Senate, wherever you were at, could say, well, I voted for that bill. Well, which time? The first time or the second time? You know, so it made it hard to hold those people accountable for whether, and he said the only reason we have two chambers is because of the fact that that we kind of want to slow down the process, which I'll tell you what they did in the unicameral to prevent that, and also to make the large states and the sparsely populated states happy. It was the great compromise at the Constitutional Convention. And he goes, we don't need to do that in Nebraska. I mean, we're not, because our districts are all by population. You can't. I will tell you that there was a state, let me think who it was. Alabama, Georgia, one of those southern states that for a long time, their House seats were by population, but their state Senate was by county. Well, some counties were vastly overrepresented, you know. And the Supreme Court declared that unconstitutional. Of course, the question you might ask, well, then the Senate's unconstitutional. Well, it can't be unconstitutional because it's in the Constitution. So, because some people today would like to get rid of the U.S. Senate because it overrepresents rural states, right? We don't have as many people, but you can't get rid of it because it's in the Constitution. So it can't be unconstitutional. Okay, enough about him. Any questions about George Norris? One of my favorite people, again, I taught political science for my degrees actually in that. And I often said that probably the reason I did so well and did get complaints against me is I can argue both sides. I like to fathom myself that I, like George Norris, don't believe it should be a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. It just should be whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. So that's why I like him. But he was the unanimous first choice for the Nebraska Hall of Fame. One last little tidbit about him, though. In the end, the Republican Party really didn't like him. And the second to his last election, they actually ran a grocer from Broken Bow named George Norris against him in the primary to try to defeat, because they were so mad because he was this moderate. But it didn't work. So. I think the last time he ran, because again, he ran 5 times. So he got elected 5 times. The 4th time he ran, they ran that other George Norris against him within his own party. And of course, he won the primary and then went on and won the general. The last time he ran and was elected, his 5th time, he ran as an independent and won, which is highly unusual to be able to run as a nonpartisan person and won. But then he ran one more time and he was really failing in age, and then he was defeated. But by that time, I think it had more to do with age than anything. Okay, second inductee, and of course the first woman, Willa Cather. If you haven't been to Red Cloud lately, you need to go down there. That's a wonderful, wonderful facility that they're developing down there in Red Cloud, and they just opened a boutique hotel. So we went down and checked it out. I highly recommend it. So if you have any qualms, it's a lovely hotel that they just opened, Hotel Gardner, named for, is it Silas Gardner, who was former governor and came from Red Cloud. Anyway, of course, she did get a Pulitzer Prize for one of her own and has many other famous novels. And fun to read and know. And you may also know that, before I flip the page here, in 2018, the Nebraska unicameral decided that the 2 statues that Nebraska had in Statuary Hall back in Washington, D.C. So just as we have Hall of Fame members in our state capitol building, Washington, D.C., the Capitol building has something called Statuary Hall, where every state gets to have 2 statues. It's the full statue. In the Capitol building in Lincoln, it's just a bust. Well, some of them are about waist up, anyhow. We had, anybody want to guess who the 2, I'll give you a hint, 2 men who had represented Nebraska there since 1867?
J. Sterling Morton.
J. Sterling Morton was one.
Standing River.
No. You're ahead of your time, sir. Another former politician.
Is it Brian?
William Jennings Bryan were the 2. And Statuary Hall opened in 1867. Actually, and let me clarify, we didn't, because we had to pay for the statues, the state of Nebraska. So we didn't send 2 until I think it was 1937, but it was William Jennings Bryan and J. Sterling Morton. So in 2018, just before the pandemic, they decided it was time, not that they were mad at J. Sterling Morton or William Jennings Bryan, but they'd had their time. And a lot of states by this time, you have to let them stay there, I think it's a minimum of 20 years. You can't, just say, and next year we want this person. They have to be there for a while. But we decided it was time that there's a couple other people we should, highlight from Nebraska. And so they picked Willa Cather and Standing Bear. So Standing Bear, they tasked that to the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs. Some of you may know Judy Gosh-Kabash headed up that commission. And then the Willa Cather task, I guess you could say, was given to the Nebraska Hall of Fame. Boy, we met a lot during that time, and we did meet with some people. The woman there in the striped with the navy cardigan, she's the head of the Willa Cather Foundation. Her name's Ashley Olson. So the commission was in charge, but then we asked for advisors. And so we got a couple people from the Willa Cather Commission. There's a guy there with the red tie from the University of Nebraska, because of course Cather was a Nebraska graduate. And they also were going to pay, the University of Nebraska was going to pay for the reception, which was going to be a little bit of money. And they gave us the task of doing this, but the unicameral gave us no money to do it with. Of course. Here, do this, but there's no money. So first thing we had to do is figure out how we were going to pay for the statue. And I apologize that she's kind of cut off there at the top. But it's a beautiful statue. Littleton Alston, who is the guy with the salt and pepper hair and the black glasses, he's the sculptor. So first off, we had to come up with how we're going to pay for this statue, because the Capitol doesn't pay for it, and the unicameral gave us no money. Some of you may remember Ron Holm from Nebraska Public Media. He had a friend that he was visiting with one day. They were having lunch. Judge, just say it. Oh, I hate these moments when you're trying to think of a name. Lori Smith Kemp. She's the first female federal judge from Nebraska. And he was talking to her about that we've been tasked with this, but we're going to have to raise the money, not only for the statue, but if some of us go back and be there for it, and then we got to get her there, and the hauling of a large statue takes a little bit of money. And then if we want to have a reception at all, et cetera, et cetera. But he was talking to her, and she goes, "I'll pay for the statue. I'll pay for the statue." So we couldn't anywhere in the program, we could just acknowledge her as one of the many donors. But at the base where her feet meet the granite pedestal, underneath it says money donated for the statue by. But you'd have to take the statue off the base to find that. But we wanted somehow to put Judge Kemp's name on there, because she funded the whole thing, all of the statue, and the transportation of the statue. And so then we found the university to do the reception as well. But she is, of course, the only Pulitzer Prize winner in Statuary Hall. There are other women in Statuary Hall. I want to say maybe of the 100, because two for every state, I think there's 13 women. But she's the first Pulitzer Prize. And the other thing that was unique about this is Littleton Alston, our sculptor. This is the first sculpture in the U.S. Capitol building that was done by an African American. They've all been done by, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to offend anybody, by white men. And I would always say to my students, I'm not anti-white men, I married one, so I'm happy with that man, white men. So. But it's just nice to see a little more diversity in that regard. So, and he was absolutely wonderful to work with as a sculptor, because his first rendition of her was because we got drawings, and then to add this, to add that. The first rendition of her, we thought he had her a little too skinny. Looks great, but I don't think she looked that skinny, so we made her plumper up a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. She's got a book in her hand, she's got a pen in her hand. There at the base, which you can't see, there's a goldenrod and a broken wagon wheel. I mean, just kind of the little details of it. And her walking stick. Any questions about Willa Gavin? So we're thrilled that she's the second bust in our state capitol, and she is currently one of two. And again, Standing Bear is the other one. Oh, you might have noticed the date. We didn't get her in until June of 2023. When they passed the legislation in 2018, the unicameral authorizing the Hall of Fame Commission to do this, it was good for 5 years, till June 30th of 2023. 2018, no big deal. And then COVID hit. So the Standing Bear got put in right away because they already had a statue of Standing Bear. They just had to make another one. So they took the same, but we had to go through the whole request process. And, we had to raise the money, and we had to and then the Capitol didn't reopen to visitors, if you recall. I don't think the U.S. Capitol reopened, so nobody was inducted. Once COVID hit, nobody was inducted. We're the first inductee after COVID, because they did that, and some other things that happened in 2021. The Capitol was closed down, and so we didn't get permission until the fall of 2022 that it was even possible. But then it was an election year, and then all kinds of the restrictions placed on by the architect of the Capitol is just very onerous, and so it just took a lot of time.
Excuse me for a minute, I think Rita, you were there.
I was there. I was just going to say, one of the things that was so charming was, although Littleton teaches at Creighton,
Yes.
and is an Omaha resident,
Yes.
he grew up just blocks from the Capitol, and his whole family came and supported him, and they were there in mass, and it was great.
It was, yeah, it really was great. Yeah, and we tried, well, he was on, even though he's not on the commission, when we did all this, he was in on all of our meetings, and he was great. He would come in person. He's a wonderful human being, yeah. Yeah, we really enjoyed working with him a lot. Yep. Okay, I'm trying to remember the kid, I think is the son of the guy from the university. I don't remember who he is, but there you go. Other women that are in the Hall of Fame, Maury Sanders, author, Best Reader Aldrich, author, Grace Abbott, who was one of the first women to be in she wasn't a cabinet member, she was one of the undersecretaries for Health and Human Services during, I believe it's FDR's term. She was all about child advocacy. She and her sister were from Grand Island and early advocates for the welfare of children. And then Suzette LaFlèche Tibbles, who of course was the interpreter for Standing Bear in the trial of Standing Bear, is who that is. Let's see. The first Native American was of course Standing Bear, Ponca Chief Standing Bear. And of course he is the other person that is of course in Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. If you've never read some of the stuff about the Ponca Trail of Tears, the very first Trail of Tears is the Cherokee and Choctaw coming from Georgia over to Oklahoma, but the story of the Ponca being moved from northeastern Nebraska to Oklahoma will just rip your heart out. And of course the famous Standing Bear v. Crook, General George Crook was the person who had him arrested because he was under military orders to do so because he was AWOL from the reservation. But then it was Crook, by the way, no immediate relation whatsoever. General Crook had no children. So, but it was Crook who then went to the newspaper guy Tibbles and said, you should find somebody to represent him and have him sue me. And so it was Crook who actually said, please, somebody sue me, that this guy should be allowed to live where he wants to live and not be forced to live in Oklahoma. And so, of course, the famous quote is, that hand is not the color of yours, but if I pierce it, I shall feel pain. You will also feel pain, and the blood that will flow from mine will be the same color as yours. I am a man. Joe Strida has a book by that name. That's just fabulous to read. I used to require it in my history of Nebraska classes because it's a really great story. And it's a great story about, again, so you know, an old white man doing what's right. You know, that sue me. You should sue me so you can have your freedom. The downside to this whole case of Standing Bear is that he was allowed to return to their homeland area. They couldn't go back to their exact homeland area because the U.S. government had mistakenly given that to the Lakota Sioux in a treaty. But they could go to a nearby area in the Niobrara region, and but they had to renounce their tribal allegiance. So the Southern Ponca are still in Oklahoma, and they were recognized as the Ponca tribe. And the Ponca that returned with Standing Bear were not recognized until 1979, about 100 years. Good 100 years, before they were recognized as the Northern Ponca tribe, because they had to give up their Ponca tribal allegiance in order to return as a man and a woman. So, so it was a win, you know, they truly had their day in court, because some people thought the judge should have thrown the case out because they're not U.S. citizens. In 1879, they're not U.S. citizens. They don't get citizenship. No Native American got citizenship until 1924. So, yeah, they were not citizens. They had lived here forever, but they were born here, but not U.S. citizens. So that's a great story if you haven't read it. And one more thing I was going to tell you about Standing Bear. And of course, it was at this trial that Suzette LaFleche-Tibbs was the translator. And then she ends up marrying the newspaper man that covered the story. After his wife died. His wife died, and then he and Suzette married. Oh, I know, one more anecdotal story. So I made my students read I Am a Man, and we were talking about the Ponca Trail of Tears. And so one year, gosh, had to be in the, I guess it doesn't really matter, 2015, 2016, I did a 2-day trip with some students out of my history Nebraska class, and we kind of followed, well, we kind of went from south to north. And I had one of my students, and he was kind of this, he was a city guy, he was a football player, he only took this course because he had to take this course, you know. And he goes, Ted, go on this tour, I don't know why. And he kept saying, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Oklahoma, I don't see the difference, you know. Why would they want to live here? Why does it make such a big deal about going back to the Niobrara? And I said, well, just come along on the trip and see what you think when we get done. So we had been all day kind of going from the southern border of Nebraska, because we stayed in and working our way north. And by the time we got up to Niobrara, and we were staying at Niobrara State Park, it was pitch black by the time we got there. So, you know, you really couldn't see a whole lot. He gets up early in the morning and goes for a run, and he comes back and he goes, oh, Dr. Crook, I had no idea. And I said, what do you mean you had no idea? And he goes, it's just so beautiful up here. He goes, I couldn't believe the Niobrara, or the Missouri, where the Niobrara and the Missouri come together, and if you've ever been up there, the Missouri doesn't look anything like the Missouri I live by down here. He goes, it's so beautiful. I just wanted to stay out there with nature all morning long. And I was like, oh, success! I finally reached him. But it took a trip to actually go see that location, and he just was overwhelmed by how bucolic it was up there, how peaceful and restful it was. So there you go. Okay. Other Native Americans, there are 2 others. Again, Red Cloud, Chief Red Cloud, and then, of course, Suzette LaFleche-Tibbs. Okay. Our first African American in the Hall of Fame is our most recent inductee, Malcolm X. I will tell you, Malcolm X had been nominated at least 3 times. He was highly controversial, as most people know. He's, without getting into the politics of it, obviously for a while he was, someone would consider him a racist because he espoused hatred toward the whites. But he did, in his later life, when conversion to Islam, that he changed that all around. He has a book, somebody help me with the name, that now I believe they give to pretty much any inmate in the prison that would want this book, because it's his story of how he turned his life around while he was in prison, and how he came to realize that his hatred for the white man was not helping anybody, and how he turned it around. So that has become not a required read, but that book is provided free of charge, I believe, in the Nebraska State prison system to anybody in prison. So he was inducted, technically not a unanimous pick, and I will say this was, I never voted for him, and not because I didn't like him as a candidate. I never considered him, and they know this, I've talked to the Malcolm X people a lot about this, and they know I voted against him every time. He qualifies because he was born in Nebraska, but his father was a minister, and his father and his family were harassed. They lived in North Omaha, to the point that they fled because of the fear for their life, and so they left. He only came back to, and so he was not quite 2 when they left Omaha. Of course, not his choice, his parents, obviously. And he only came back 1 time, and that was to give a speech in North Omaha. So he was only in Nebraska 1 time in his adult life. So my argument to her, to the Malcolm X Foundation, and again, he qualifies. He was born in Nebraska. But I just felt like there were other people who qualified that I like their, that my final word was, I wanted somebody who considered themselves a Nebraskan. And he never considered himself a Nebraskan. And of course, their comeback was, well, why would he? And I was like, well, I get that. You know, that your family was basically harassed out of the state. So anyway, you make your choices. Yeah.
Is that his real name?
No, well, and don't, Malcolm Little, he was born Malcolm Little, but he goes by something Shabazz. Somebody, I mean, when we did all this, I read all that.
His daughter goes by that.
Yeah, I think after he converted to Islam, he got a whole new name. But they were, and then Malcolm X kind of became his, what I want to say, formal name. But he was born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska. So he qualifies. And certainly, I mean, they had been nominating Malcolm X, Malcolm Little, for a long time. My other comment to them, and so think about this, and I'll ask you here in just a moment. My comment to them was, Gerald Ford was born in Omaha. He was born Gerald King. No, not Gerald, Leslie King Jr. He was born in Omaha, and then the father abandoned his mother and so she moved to Michigan, where she met Gerald Ford Sr., who then adopted Leslie King to be Leslie King Jr., and he was renamed Gerald Ford Jr. So Gerald Ford was born in Nebraska. And I said, but I would never vote to put him in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. And again, my argument, I think Malcolm X should be in some Civil Rights Hall of Fames, and I'm good with that, but, you know, I said, likewise, and, you know, she understood my point. I said, I'm not anti-Malcolm X, I think there are other people who are more Nebraskan, and that's who I'd like to put in the Hall of Fame. So, again, but you'll see in a second, there's commissioners come and go, so there you go. So I'll talk about that in just a second. If you want to see the induction ceremony, because it was pretty amazing. I mean, it was different, because we let the Malcolm X Foundation kind of, we were in charge, the Hall of Fame. We've been instructed by the legislature to conduct this induction ceremony. And the Malcolm X, oh, that's the other thing. In the past, Malcolm X paid for the reception afterwards, the Malcolm X Foundation. But we were in charge of the ceremony. And in the past, the bust had to be paid for by whoever was being inducted. I mean, the supporters, obviously, they're gone. But about 3 years ago, before this, we lobbied, the Hall of Fame Commission lobbied the unicameral and said, this is not right. That you want us, we pick somebody, and then we say to those people who have nominated that person, but you'll have to pay for the bust, and then you have to give it to the state of Nebraska, because it belongs to the state of Nebraska, and it's in the state capital. And we said, that's not right for the unicameral to say, pick these people, and then give us the bust, but make somebody else pay for it. Because again, the Hall of Fame Commission had no money to pay for it. And one of the arguments was, we had a couple nominees one time that once they were nominated and we sent the letter, thank you for the nomination, blah, 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 blah. Should your nominee be selected, you will have to pay for the bust. And they withdrew the nomination. And we're like, well, that's not right. That's not right. Because the bust,
How much do they cost?
good question. I'm going to say around 50,000. Because there's criteria that have to be met before, you know. So you can't just, you know, throw up something in the capital. There were all kinds of strict criteria of what you have. So we use the Nebraska Arts Council when we're actually doing the bust. And again, you go through the whole process. So like when we were doing the Malcolm X bust, we did a request for proposal in Littleton Nest and actually applied again to do that bus. But there was another African-American artist out in Lincoln that we ended up selecting to do the bust of Malcolm X, and he did a great job. But again, we went through all kinds of rendition. His glasses looked too big, or, you know, because you want it to look great. And then you have to decide what's going to go on the plaque, because it usually has their name, the dates of their life, and then one quote that represents them. I should have looked up again. It's a great quote that's on Malcolm X, but I forget what it is. Okay, better keep going so I have plenty of time here. Other members of the Nebraska Hall of Fame, again, William James Bryan, J. Sterling Morton, Buffalo Bill Cody, John J. Pershing, World War I, John Neihart, the author, poet, Alvin Saunders Johnson. He was a philanthropist, and he started the American School, which was the first university for non-traditional age students. Robert Furness, early governor from Brownville, early territorial leader. Edward Creighton University. Charles Bessie, the Halls and Forest. Arthur Thompson was an auctioneer. Nathan Gold of Gold's store in Lincoln, Omaha. Roscoe Pound is he was dean of Harvard Law. Father Flanagan. Hartley Burr Alexander was the person in charge of all the inscriptions in the state capitol. So all those things that you read in the state, and he's from Syracuse. He was the one of the thematic overseers for the state capitol. Was Hartley Burr Alexander. Lauren Isley, he's a writer and photojournalist. Gilbert Hitchcock was a congressman and founded the Omaha World Herald. Dwight Griswold was a governor in the 1920s during some tough, it was before the Depression, but it was still tough times for Nebraska. Nebraska really suffered right after World War I because of agriculture prices. It just plummeted. Yeah.
He's from Scottsbluff.
Griswold?
He's married here.
Yeah. He actually, if you read much about him today, he's still a very popular governor. A lot of governors can't say that because you'll notice there's not a lot of governors on there. But he was very popular. He was also the one that promoted the building of the new state capitol. And so he's the one, if you see a picture of him breaking ground with a horse and plow. Yeah.
Was he living in Scottsbluff when he was elected?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think he was. I know, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And again, one of the more, if I've seen rankings of Nebraska governor, he ranks pretty high. Yeah. And back then they had 2-year terms. They had to be reelected every 2 years. Yeah. Yeah. Thomas Rogers Kimball's a fairly recent one. He's the architect that did the cathedral in Omaha, the Hall County Courthouse. But what really sold us on him was he was the guy that came up with what they call a double-blind bidding process, that not only did the commissioners who were going to pick the design, who were a bunch of architects for the new state capitol building, so this is the 1920s, not only did they not know who the architects were that submitted the design, those architects didn't know who was on the commission, so that they wouldn't design something that they knew that architect liked. So double blind. The commissioners didn't know the architects, and the architects didn't know the commission architects that would select it. So that, and they said as a result, we got some very creative designs because they weren't trying to design something that they knew the commissioners would like because they didn't know who they were. So anyway, so he was the head of that commission to come up with an architect for the state capitol building. And then all of the Medal of Honor recipients are in a plaque. They're we don't have busts of them. They're in a plaque on that 14th floor in the town. So if you're anybody who is a Medal of Honor recipient is automatically considered in the Hall of Fame. So names get added to that occasionally as well.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a process. They're just automatically.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Oh, well, let me finish up. Possible nominees in the future. So I'm at the end anyhow, more or less. Maurice Pound, Scholar and athlete. She was the head of the Modern Language Association, first woman head of the modern, which MLA, you know how you footnote stuff. So it's an international entity. Howard Hansen, great musician, school. Oh, I forget what's it. Well known. Yeah, major musical school. He was the head of that for years. He's from Wahoo. Father Cano from North Platte in the western part of the state, Japanese American. I had never heard of him until a few years ago, and he was nominated last time. John Philip Falter, the illustrator from Saturday Evening Post. Erwin Hinckley Barber is a famous geologist. Mignon Good Everhart is a writer. She had her book chosen not too long ago as a One Nebraska, one book read. Wright Morris, a writer-photographer. Evelyn Sharp, a pilot from Ward. And then Suzette's sister, Susan LaFleche Picard, because she's the first American Indian female doctor. And they just redid her hospital up in Walt Hill. And I mean, these are just ones that have previously been nominated that we keep saying, please continue to nominate, because one of these days, you know, Malcolm X he was nominated at least 3 times, and I think there was one time in the middle there they didn't nominate him. So, you know, sometimes you don't get in on your first try. So, what about you guys? Somebody you can think of?
So the names don't stay on the nominee list.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
okay,
They're
so
nominated
good point,
for
and
law.
I want to come, Warren Buffett, but he hasn't been deceased 35 years.
Oh, that's
We gotta be
right. I
deceased
forgot about
35.
that.
Do you have a question?
I'm Jesse Johnny Carson, but he also hasn't been deceased.
He is the one that they said we should ignore
Oh,
because
yeah.
he's so famous. But again, I have to tell you, depending on, you know, he's an entertainer,
Who is that? I'm sorry.
Johnny Carson.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, if you
I
can
just
think,
read his autobiography.
yeah, if you can think of a famous Nebraskan, you know, Henry Fonda, he's eligible. I didn't put his name on.
We have somebody from our area I think is well known and was Terry Carpenter.
Oh, yeah?
Terry Carpenter.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a
Mhm.
very famous person.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Has he been gone 35 years?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would think so. I might even.
Dr. George Arbuckle Fix, who was
Yes.
first female doctor in western Nebraska, settled in Gering in 1886, served as the only physician within a 75-mile radius and offering care to pioneers.
Yeah.
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 She's in a
She's
horse
very
band.
good.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so, I want to make sure you see this. Again, this is what you find, I just copied and pasted from the Hall of Fame Commission website, which you find under nebraska.history.gov. So the purpose of the Nebraska Hall of Fame shall be to bring public attention and officially recognize those people who in their lives have achieved prominence and who were outstanding Nebraskans. Again, you can see where my mind goes there. Starting January 1, the portal is open. There's an online portal where you can nominate, and we will take those for 2 years. So you have until New Year's Eve of 2026 to enter those nominations online. I will tell you that what we get, I mean, now we get them as a portal, but back in the days, we used to get, you know, like paper copies. Because I've been on since 2008. There's who's on it now. And I mean, we would get stacks this much, and then typically they might have a book to, you know, go with it. And of all the people I've been on the commission with down through the years, I'm now the most senior member on the commission. Not necessarily the oldest, but I am the most senior member on it.
You're not older than Jim,
Yeah, Jim McKee, but he's pretty new.
is he?
Well, Jim McKee, 2022.
Yeah.
He just got, and he and I, we were on the State Historical Society. So yeah, I've been on since 2008. Tim Heller came on in 2016. Jim McKee, Jim Rose is the most recent nominee. He was everybody else, well, I was nominated by Heinemann. And then everybody else was Ricketts until Jim Rose is Pellin. And then the secretary-treasurer of our group, because we are housed in the State Historical Society, is the director of the State Historical. So he's the secretary-treasurer, but he does have a vote, or she. And they, of course, now are appointed by the governor. And then the governor's ex officio, but has no vote. Governor Ricketts came one time to one of our meetings, otherwise we typically haven't seen them. We have 2 openings. We're supposed to have 7 members, and right now we only have 5. So not only are we looking for nominations for the Hall of Fame, we would also entertain people. And I have to tell you, there's only 2 requirements. You're on for a 6-year term. You can be reappointed, as is obvious by me. You have to have an interest or knowledge of Nebraska history. No more than 3 members of any one political party. Currently, we have 2 Republicans and 2 nonpartisans on there. So, we could use somebody else. I'll just leave it at that. And here's the other thing. There's no requirement of congressional districts. So I want to tell you that Jim Rose lives in Omaha, Jim McKee lives in Lincoln, Tim Keller lives in Omaha, and I live in Nebraska City. I don't know about you guys, but that seems a little eastern. Although I am in the 3rd district.
Yeah.
Just so you feel better about it. I am in the 3rd district. And I did grow up in the 3rd district. I'm a 308er. My husband likes to call me that. As we came west, he goes, "You feeling better, you 308er?" I said, "Yeah, I'm feeling better." Grew up in the Platte River Valley by Central City is where I grew up. So anyway, what do you think? Your thoughts? Who are we missing?
We're missing a lot of people, but, yeah.
But
Malcolm X has been gone 35 years.
more than 35 years.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going to say, because he's been nominated, I think he got nominated, and then there was such a controversy they didn't nominate him. And then he's been nominated 2 more times after that. So he's been gone probably 55 years. But yeah, we hope if you have some good names, you nominate. If you know of somebody that would make a great commissioner member. I am meeting with Darrell Bohat next week. I'm kind of using him as my conduit to the governor, since the governor appointed him. I thought the governor would. But I firmly believe that we need somebody from the 3rd district who doesn't live along the Missouri River. I also firmly believe we could use a little more diversity on the commission. When I first joined the commission in 2008, but she was only there for 2 years, was Adrian Smith's mom. And Joanne Smith. And she and I have been the only women that have ever been on the commission. So, again, those are my biases. They don't have to be yours. I used to say that all the time to my students. We're all entitled to our own opinion and biases. But I would like to see somebody from the western part of the state and some kind of diversity. And, could be women, could be race, could be, their chosen language, whatever. But I would like to, and again, I love old white men, so don't be offended.
Well, thanks so much, Sarah. We appreciate your knowledge.
Thank you.